What's up, X Factor Nation? This is X Factor 27 coming back to you guys again today. Today we're gonna be reacting to another video by Wrestle with Andy. Shout out to him as always. It's the career documentary of the Yeet Man, Yeet, Jay Uso himself, 2025 Royal Rumble winner, and probably future World Heavyweight Champion and stuff like that. So I know a lot about Jay. I've been watching Jay ever since he first started in the WWE when they had that old tag team gimmick with the Samoan type thing for real with him and Jimmy. So just seeing him go from where he is today, from where he was, is really good to see. So you guys sit back, relax, and enjoy this video.
Into the main event scene, especially if most of their career has been spent as a tag team act. So that's why it's so nice then when someone who fans are behind truly does break through that glass ceiling and reaches the top of the card.
Facts.
And this is exactly what Jay Uso has achieved. Yes, this is a man who has taken the wrestling world by storm, but how did he get to this point? Well, join us as we take a deep dive into the entire tale right now. Joshua Samuel Fatu was born on August 22, 1985 in San Francisco, California, a mere 9 minutes after his twin brother Jonathan. And with him being so closely interlinked with his brother from the day of his birth then, it should come as no surprise the two would be linked at the hip all throughout their youths, with their father, former Intercontinental Champion Rikishi, often having to deal with both at the same time whenever they were wrestling with one another around the house. Yes, as members of the famed Anoa'i family, the family which also includes the likes of the Wild Samoans, Yokozuna, The Rock, and Roman Reigns, just to name a few, wrestling was always going to be in Joshua and Jonathan's blood. But that didn't mean the pair didn't have other interests during their school years too. In fact, in Joshua's case specifically, he'd get it.
Alright, so you guys see who this is, right? Sorry to pause it, but these Usos, and that's Roman Reigns right there. So I think that's Roman Reigns. So
Involved in football while studying at Escambia High School, and this would eventually lead to him taking on the role of linebacker for his college team at the University of West Alabama.
oh wow. Sorry to pause it again. I didn't know he signed to West Alabama, so homeboy was down here where state I was in. That's something very interesting to know, man. I tell you, you learn something new every day. So shout out to Jay for that, man. Wish you would have went to South, man, but I'm gonna leave that alone.
When he studied there between 2003 and 2005. Really, at this point, it may have been a possibility for Joshua to skip wrestling entirely and start up a career as a football player. It was certainly what his coach, Sam McCorkle, hoped was going to happen for him. But despite having someone like this pushing for him to go further on the gridiron, in the end, the youngster felt he wasn't getting the success he wanted out of the sport. And so it was then that after graduating college, Jay and his brother would work in a furniture moving store. That was until their uncle Umaga saw the potential they had and decided to encourage the twins to start training in the family business, with the pair following their uncle and began training. How would this training go? Pretty well as it happened, because by the time 2007 rolled around, the Fatu twins, as Joshua and Jonathan were then calling themselves, would make their in-ring debut for World Extreme Wrestling in Milton, Florida. And not long after that, the pair would even make a few appearances for places like the National Wrestling Alliance.
Wow.
Ultimately, though, it was always going to be a matter of time until they got picked up by WWE.
Yep.
And that would happen 3 years later in 2010 when Vince McMahon decided to sign the Fatu twins up to a developmental contract, and from there send them to Florida Championship Wrestling, where they'd be rebranded as the Uso Brothers. And here Joshua and Jonathan would forge their paths as they got started in FCW by challenging teams like the Rotunda Brothers and the Fortunate Sons. Hell, it would be the latter team who they actually beat on March 13th of that year to become FCW Florida Tag Team Champions. And after they had these belts in their possession, they'd go on to defend them against a string of challengers in pretty good defenses, with all this ultimately leading to the boss taking notice and deciding it was time to call them up to the main roster just a few months later.
Yeah, so if you guys didn't know, FCW before NXT was a thing was WWE's developmental program. So you saw the Usos, you had Bo Dallas, Bray Wyatt, rest in peace, Bray Wyatt, Curtis Axel, and a whole lot of other talent. Roman Reigns was a part of itself, everybody like that. So this was their developmental program before NXT was ever a thing. So yeah.
Yes, it was on the May 24th, 2010 episode of Raw, just 5 months after they debuted in FCW, that the pair, now going by the name of Jay and Jimmy Uso, would make their main roster debuts. And boy, would they make a splash here, because with Tamina by their side, they'd go straight after then unified WWE
Yeah.
Tag Team Champions, the Hart Dynasty.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, despite their best efforts, the Usos would not be able to take the gold away from the Hart Dynasty at this early stage in the game. No, instead, they'd fail in their various attempts to do so. And this all led to Tamina turning her back on the pair on the December 6th episode of Raw that same year, when she chose to throw in her chips with the team who had managed to win the tag titles that evening, Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov. Not that this would keep the Usos down for long, however. No, even if they were now without a manager, they'd continue setting out to prove why they deserve to be at the top of the card in the WWE Tag Team division. The only problem was that, now, not having anyone to help them make the plays at ringside, they eat high-profile losses to the likes of The Core and David Otunga and Michael McGillicuddy over the coming months. That's right, even after moving over to SmackDown...
The fact that David Otunga has a pinfall victory over Jey Uso is just crazy to me, but that was a different time during WWE, man, when they was really high on David Otunga and the Core and all them guys, man. So still early in their career. So.
And formally turning babyface, Jay and Jimmy would struggle to string together a series of victories. And after a certain point, that set people to wondering if they really were the next big thing in waiting. Luckily for them then, by the time 2012 came around, they'd have started to turn the corner by heading down to NXT for a while and getting wins over teams such as The Ascension and Kurt Hawkins and Tyler Rex. And after that was over, and they were back in the swing of things, the brothers would head back up to SmackDown, where they got the better of pairings like Darren Young and Titus O'Neil. All they needed now then was another shot at that tag team gold. And this would come for them at WrestleMania 28 on April 1st of that year, when they were a part of a triple threat WWE Tag Team title bout on the pre-show against both Tyson Kidd and Justin Gabriel, and then champions Primo and Epico. Would this be the moment the Usos finally reached the top of the mountain? And no, it wouldn't, as no matter how hard they fought, they just couldn't pick up the victory here. And that losing streak would carry on into the spring and summer of that year, as for the second time, questions began being asked about how good Jimmy and Jay really were. So realizing they had to start changing things up, otherwise fans were going to lose faith in them forever, it would be in June of 2013 that they began wearing tribal face paint designed to highlight their Samoan heritage, all while they were continuing to perform a traditional Siva Tau dance during their entrance. And this change in the way they carried themselves proved to be the start of something for the Usos, as by the time 2014 was dawning, they'd have embarked upon a winning streak, one which saw them get to challenge then WWE Tag Team Champions, the New Age Outlaws, on the March 3rd episode of Raw. Would this be the moment they finally won the gold? Yes, it would. And now that they had the titles...
Yeah, I remember watching that Raw. I was in the 11th grade when that happened. And I remember watching it, and I was very happy to see it, because I've been, like I said, Andy been saying, I've been watching these guys for a minute, man. So they was on a long losing streak, but when they finally won that championship gold, I was in 11th grade. I was loud with it, and my mom was telling me to calm down, shut up, and all that noise. So, but yeah, man, I remember that day. It's been a while, but I remember it.
Around their waists, the pair were able to successfully defend them at the WrestleMania 30 pre-show just 1 month later against not only the Real Americans, but also Los Matadores and Rybaxel too. Of course, by this point they were on a roll, and that meant when the Wyatt family started targeting them in the summer, they'd be able to dispatch this threat with relative ease. Sure, they would ultimately lose their gold to the Rhodes brothers at Night of Champions on September 21st, but by then, they'd fully established themselves as major players, so it wasn't like such a loss was as devastating as it would have been before. No, by now, Jay and Jimmy were made men as far as the tag team division was concerned, and that was only further solidified when, just a few months later on the December 29th episode of Raw, they'd recapture the tag team titles. Sadly though, any momentum they were building here would be halted when, in early 2014, Jay suffered a shoulder injury which ended up taking him out of action for the next 6 months. And that meant no Usos on WWE TV again until November of that year, with this being the point both brothers returned to help their...
A young Roman Reigns, the big dog, with the contacts and everything, man. Man, how time is flying. Who we got today, man. I tell you, this is a throwback of throwbacks right here.
Their cousin Roman Reigns fend off the challenge of Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, and The New Day on an episode of Raw. After that, Well, after that, they'd enter into a feud with the New Day, which saw both teams put on a great series of matches, which helped to keep the division alive during a period where it wasn't at its best. Yes, during the 2010s, the amount of focus given to tag team wrestling was arguably at an all time low, and so it was tasked with these two teams to keep the flame burning for the most part. And boy, did they succeed at this, because
Thanks.
whether we're talking about their match at the 2016 Royal Rumble or any of the other bouts they had throughout what remained of the decade, they almost always managed to steal the show. Of course, it wasn't just the New Day who Jimmy and Jay were fighting throughout this time, however. No, throughout 2016, they also got into notable programs with the likes of the Dudley Boys, the Good Brothers, and American Alpha. And during this period, they also rediscovered an edge they'd been missing for a few years when they turned heel on the September 6th episode of SmackDown. Sadly, though, this edge would not be enough to see them with the tag team titles over on the Blue brand during 2016. No, that wouldn't come until the March 21st, 2017 episode of SmackDown, the very place where they were able to snag the belts from Chad Gable and Jason Jordan, the pair then holding them, to become the first team to ever have held both the red and blue brand versions of Tag Team Gold in WWE. How would they celebrate this achievement? Well, by racking up win after win during their subsequent title defenses against teams such as Breezango. And when that was done, they'd reignite their feud with the New Day in a series of excellent encounters, the best of which was probably their tag team Hell in a Cell match at the titular pay-per-view on October 8th. Yes, by the
Yeah, and they also had a very good kind of like a little rap battle set roast session during the feud when the Uso turned heel and the New Day was kind of face. And I forgot which one of them said, "Don't get X-rated like your boy Xavier Woods." So if you guys didn't know, Xavier and Paige kind of had some X-rated stuff going on and stuff. So Wale, the rapper, was in that as well. So it was very interesting to see, man. I tell you, that's a throwback. I wish I could play it, but because of copyright reason, I can't play it. So
this point, it was becoming increasingly hard to boo Jay and Jimmy. And so that was why, after this leg of their feud with the New Day ended, they'd formally turn face once more and head into 2018 as righteous defending champions. But while things were looking great in the ring for Jay at this point, outside of the ring, he got into legal trouble behind the scenes in January of 2018, something which meant he would be banned from entering countries like Canada whenever WWE headed over there for a show. Of course, given his level of talent, the hot water he found himself in was never going to last forever. No, as 2018 continued on, he'd gradually find himself getting out of the doghouse. And that would all climax with the Usos getting a chance to appear on the main card of a WrestleMania show for the first time ever on April 8th, when they defended their tag team titles against both the New Day and the Bludgeon Brothers. Sure, they would lose their gold here, but the fact they'd finally gotten a true WrestleMania moment was enough to soften the blow.
right.
And this allowed them to bounce back as the year progressed then by having great matches against opponents as wide and varied as The Bar, Team Hell No, and the Good Brothers. So it was that by the time Elimination Chamber came around on February 17th of 2019, they'd be back in the title picture, with it being here that they challenged and defeated then champions The Miz and Shane McMahon to become SmackDown Tag Team Champions once more. Sadly, though, this would prove to be a relatively short-lived title run for the Usos, because it was on the April 9th episode of SmackDown that they dropped their gold to the Hardy Boys. So after that, they'd pick themselves back up, dust themselves off, and head back over to Raw during the 2019 draft, where they'd set about climbing the ranks once more in matches against The Revival, and Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder.
Right.
Honestly, it just seemed like a matter of time until the titles were going to be back in their hands. And that's what made it hurt all the more then, when after Jimmy got himself into a legal issue behind the scenes, both brothers would find themselves pulled from TV for the remainder of the year.
Yeah.
That's right, it wouldn't be until the January 3rd, 2020 episode of SmackDown that we saw the pair again. And this time they'd be keeping it in the family, as upon their return, they'd immediately align themselves with Roman Reigns during his feud with Baron Corbin and Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah, this is kind of like the beginning of the bloodline a little bit, like a little sneak peek of what we was gonna get for the upcoming years, man. So
Once again, though, any momentum they were starting to build up here would be halted when, at WrestleMania 36, Jimmy legitimately injured himself. But rather than keep both men out indefinitely here as had been done in the past, on this occasion WWE decided to try out a solo run with Jay in the meantime. And that all led to him winning a fatal four-way match on the September 4th episode of SmackDown to become the #1 contender to his cousin's Universal Championship.
Yeah.
Of course, this wasn't the old version of the big dog anymore, though. No, as the autumn rolled around, Roman had turned heel and transformed into his megalomaniacal tribal chief character, one who was intent on having the rest of his family bend the knee to him as he formed a bloodline around himself.
Thanks.
For Jay's part, however, he would at first rebel against such a demand. And that led to him having 2 good matches against Reigns at Clash of the Champions on September 27th and Hell in a Cell on October 25th, each of...
Yeah, that Hell in a Cell match was so good. The first one was good, but this one was good too. Cause when Roman and Jay had that match in Hell in a Cell, and Jimmy came in, and Roman started fake crying, talking about I don't know who I'm at no more, and put Jimmy in the guillotine to Jay quick and fell in line. Absolute cinema. That was some of the best. That's when I really knew that this Roman Reigns right here was special. This wasn't just no maniacal, evil, cartoon villain or something like that. This was somebody that was hell bent on you gonna acknowledge him, or it's over with for you. You fall in line, or that's it.
which he would ultimately lose. So because he had lost 2 in a row, then Jay felt the need to pledge loyalty to the head of the table and formally joined the Bloodline, something his brother would join him in when he returned to the ring soon thereafter. And so began the most successful storyline WWE had put out in years, as the trio, who were later joined by Solo Sikoa, proceeded to dominate the entirety of WWE television for the next several years. As to what role Jay would play in this domination specifically, well, early on, he and his brother would be tasked with winning both the Raw and SmackDown tag team titles. And that was something they started doing when, at the Money in the Bank pre-show on July 18th, 2021, they'd regained the Blue Brand's gold from Rey and Dominic Mysterio. Then, after that was over, they'd begin setting their sights on the Raw prizes too, with this being something they also won on the May 20th, 2022 episode of SmackDown after beating Arcade Bro for the honor.
Yep.
Where would they go from here? Well, continuing the Bloodline's reign of dominance, they'd defend against all comers. But by that point, Jay had other problems to deal with outside of just keeping his tag team titles, as by then, a usurper had entered his family, a usurper who went by the name of Sami Zayn. Yes, this was the point the Bloodline angle went from good to great, as untrusting of Sami, Jay would consistently act cold towards him whenever he tried to get involved in family business, with all of this arguably climaxing in the excellent Feeling Oozy segment on the October 28th episode.
Yeah, look at Jimmy back there. Jimmy, Jay, and even Roman were all trying to keep it together, man. So it was that Uzi crowd was funny as crowd, man. So I can understand, especially being in front of a loud crowd and trying not to laugh, and it's supposed to be a serious moment. I'll see how they did it.
SmackDown that year. But whether Jay liked it or not, by now, Sami had fully ingratiated himself into the Bloodline. And as time went on, even he would come to love him when, after the honorary Uso helped secure the victory for his team at Survivor Series on November 26th inside of a War Games double cage, Jay finally hugged his new family member and accepted him into the fold. It's just a shame then that it would be mere months later on January 28th, 2023 at the Royal Rumble that Sami finally decided he'd had enough of being bullied by Roman Reigns and turned on the Bloodline, something which left the youngest Uso conflicted about where his allegiances lay going forward. In the end though, he'd pick his blood. After all, by now he and Jimmy were the longest reigning tag team champions in WWE history. And that would all lead us to night 1 of WrestleMania 39, where, in the main event, the Usos would take on the team of Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens for the undisputed WWE Tag Team titles. That's right, from the pre-show to the main event, Jey Uso had come a long way.
Thanks.
And while his team would be on the losing end that night, the momentum he was building up with fans continued on into the summer when he too decided he'd had enough of his cousin pushing him around. And so that was why he also turned on him and left the Bloodline, formally turning babyface again in the process. Where would he go from here? Well, like he had early on during the Bloodline saga, he'd go to war with Roman Reigns, and that led to Jay and Jimmy beating Roman and Solo Sikoa in a tag team bout at Money in the Bank on July 1st, with Jay actually pinning the Tribal Chief here in order to set up a third one-on-one encounter between them at SummerSlam just 1 month later. Of course, no matter how hard the man who had by then come to be known as Main Event Jey Uso tried to win this one when it came time for the bell to ring, he'd been unable to do so. No, thanks to his own brother Jimmy screwing him out of the win, as he once more aligned himself with the heel stable, Jay would be forced to stare at the lights by the time all was said and done. So realizing there was nothing left for him to do on SmackDown following this, he quit and instead moved over to Raw, where now a true singles act for the first time in his career, he'd enjoy a wave of popularity few could have ever foreseen for him. That's not to say he'd be done with tag team act.
Jay moving to Raw was the best thing for his career during that time. I felt WWE after his one-on-one match with Roman, that last one, they really felt like, okay, it's time we put Jay by himself. Now he's able to fly on his own wings. So that was very good to see.
Action completely though. No, not long after rejoining the Red Brand, Jay would actually find himself forming an alliance with an old enemy in Cody Rhodes, one which proved successful enough for the pair to briefly win the undisputed WWE Tag Team titles from the Judgment Day at October 7th's Fastlane. But then the youngest Uce needed this alliance to get him through those early days on the Raw roster because, as a result of all the chaos he'd caused while part of the Bloodline, there were few in the babyface locker room who wanted anything to do with him. Hell, aside from the American Nightmare, the only person who would show any love towards Jay at this point would be his old friend Sami Zayn, someone who knew all too well what it was like to be trapped and brainwashed by its leader. And so, it was then that with these two men vouching for him, over time the Californian would start to win the favor of his co-workers again, all while he was getting even more over with fans on account of his new Yeet catchphrase. That said, due to a legal argument about who owned the rights to this catchphrase, there was a brief period where Jay had to stop using it, with this threatening to halt much of his momentum. Luckily for him, though, any legal issues here would be quickly resolved, and so he was back to having it on his t-shirts before long, t-shirts which were now selling out everywhere he went like hotcakes. So by the time he was doing things like challenging Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight title on the December 4th, 2023 episode of Raw, it felt like Jay being a top guy was the most natural thing in the world. Still though, for as over as he was getting, he wasn't quite ready for the world title yet. No, whenever he challenged for that belt, he'd find himself coming out on the losing end. However, at this time, he would have possibly the biggest match of his career, as at WrestleMania 40 Night 1 on April 6th of that year, he'd win the long-awaited singles match he and his brother Jimmy had. And by the
I wasn't a big fan of that WrestleMania 40 match. I feel like the build-up could have been a lot better for it and stuff. I know they built it up, but it just didn't seem like it hit like that. I wanted something like Matt and Jeff Hardy type story build up when they had their matches and stuff going against each other. But the match wasn't that, it was alright, but for WrestleMania and stuff, I wasn't a big fan of it, but it was okay. So
time WrestleMania came to an end the following evening, he'd be right there to help Cody Rhodes win the undisputed WWE title from Roman Reigns. And after that was over, he'd continue to build up a name for himself as a single star on Raw by getting another chance to challenge for the World Heavyweight title, then being held by Damian Priest at Backlash on May 4th. Again, though, he would fail to win the big one here, and this was certainly a blow to him. But again, Jey Uso would not let this loss hold him down for long. No, like the last time he failed to win a title as a single star, he'd pick himself up and enter into that year's King of the Ring tournament, where he made it all the way to the semifinals before being eliminated by Gunther. Where would he go after that? Into the men's Money in the Bank ladder match at July 6th's titular PLE. And while Drew McIntyre came out of this one the winner instead of him, he'd just look for another pathway back towards the top. A pathway which started with him winning a fatal four-way bout against Pete Dunne, Ilya Dragunov, and Braun Strowman on the September 9th episode of Raw to become the #1 contender for the Intercontinental title. Of course, if this had been a few years prior, winning the Intercontinental title would not have been a major achievement, as by then that belt had lost much of the prestige it had in years past. But after Gunther had done such an excellent job of rehabbing it with his record-breaking run with it during the early 2020s, it now felt like a huge deal. So when Jay challenged then-champ Braun Breaker on the September 23rd episode of Raw and beat him for the secondary prize, it felt like a truly special moment for him and a culmination of all the hard work he'd put in over the years finally paying off big time. So special of a moment was it, in fact, even when he dropped the title back to Braun a few weeks later, it didn't feel like the down cycle it might have felt like before.
Facts.
No, by now Jey Uso was fully established as a big-time singles player on Raw, and that would mean when in the weeks leading up to Survivor Series, he made the decision to join forces with Bloodline members Roman Reigns, Sami Zayn, and his brother Jimmy again, this time as a babyface act to take on the false heel version of the group
Timu version.
made up of Solo Sikoa, Tamatanga, Tongaloa, and Jacob Fatu in a War Games bout, which also included CM Punk and Bronson Reed. It didn't feel like a regression. Rather, it felt like the next natural step in the story. And not long after this, he'd have another shot at the gold when he was narrowly defeated by Gunther in January of 2025 at Saturday night's main event. The only question left then was, where would his story take him next? And the answer to that came at the Royal Rumble, as it was there that in one of the biggest surprises of the modern era, Jay entered at number 20 and went on to win the whole thing, with him beating out the likes of CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and John Cena in order to do so. Does this mean he's finally going to win that World Heavyweight title? We certainly hope so. And if he does that, in the closing bout of the biggest show of the year, he will finally have justified his name as Main Event Jey Uso, someone who's destined to go down as one of the biggest breakout stars of his era.
Yep. Well, all right, guys.
It's
That's the end of the video. Shout out to Wrestle with Andy as always. Link to the original video will be down below. I'm very proud of Jay. He has come a long way. Like Andy just showed all of us that he has come a long way from football to starring wrestling, FCW, WWE to where he is now, man. So WrestleMania 41, the Yeet movement is in full effect. We will have a World Heavyweight Champion, new World Heavyweight Champion, and it's gonna be well deserved, man. So I can't wait for WrestleMania 41. A lot of people are mad that Jay won. I was upset a little bit at first, but bro earned it, man. So the Yeet movement is in full effect, and I'm looking forward to it. But other than that, y'all have a good day. X Factor out.